Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. We start from Afghanistan. Afghan Taliban have claimed the responsibility for the blast which has killed 10 people and wounded over 100 in Kabul. A Taliban official said the target was the Defense Ministry's technical installation near the capital's Green Zone diplomatic area. Earlier, security officials say several attackers stormed a building after ramming a car bomb into its gates. They said in addition to the civilians and the government employee, the blast injured several Taliban fighters too. Afghan security personnel and Taliban fighters are currently fighting for the control of the attacked building. Moving on to Sudan, where the 7 protesters have been killed while over 180 others injured in a rally demanding civilian rule in the country. Tens of thousands of protesters marched on the presidential palace as well. The military used live ammunition, stun grenades and tear gas to disperse the crowds gathered in Khartoum. Protesters say the demonstrations will continue until justice is served for the victims of the June 3rd Khartoum massacre. Earlier, security forces arrested a number of protest leaders during raids on their houses and offices. The mass demonstrations come amid attempts by Ethiopia and the African Union to mediate between the protesters and the ruling generals. In Libya, Khalifa Haftar's forces have claimed destroying a Turkish drone at Tripoli's only working airport of Mitiga. LNA spokesperson says the drone was being used to spy on them. This comes as the leader of the Eastern Forces declared a state of general mobilization in the country. Earlier, the Eastern Forces captured 6 Turkish nationals in Libya, flaring up tensions with Ankara. The government warned the Eastern Forces of consequences if the citizens are not released immediately. Turkey's Defense Minister Hulusi Akar says there will be a very heavy price for the hostile attitudes or the attacks. 9 government fighters and 6 civilians have been killed in Syria after Israeli forces attacked the town of Sahnaya, south of Damascus. 3 children are also among the dead. The missile attack launched over Lebanese airspace wounded 21 others. Explosions rocked the outskirts of Damascus, mainly to the west and into the mountains of Homs. The Syrian military says its air defense system brought down several Israeli missiles. Israel has refused to comment on the incident. Human Rights Watch says Western donors must be sure their contributions to Syria don't fuel repression. Damascus has kept tight control on aid to the country since the Syrian civil war that began in 2011. Here are the details.
Human Rights Watch has accused the Syrian government of depriving citizens in opposition-held areas of aid supplies while favoring loyalists. It added that the UN and other aid agencies had been forced into complicity in order to gain access to certain areas.
And what we found is that the Syrian government really is a master of manipulation when it comes to aid. It has used a variety of techniques to ensure that humanitarian aid goes not to the people who need it most, but the people whom it deems as its loyalists.
The executive director of Human Rights Watch, Ken Roth, said that this makes it necessary for donors to lead the Syrian reconstruction efforts themselves.
And so one of the things that we are recommending is that this dynamic be shifted and that the international community operate in a more unified manner so that the donors and the humanitarians are in the driver's seat rather than the Syrian government.
Both the US and EU have refused to provide reconstruction aid to Syria without an end to the civil war and political transition. Meanwhile, the economies of Russia and Iran, the Assad regime's main allies, are struggling. This makes Syria more dependent on Western aid than ever before.
Russia has said it has started manufacturing the S-500 missile defense systems. CEO of the Russian Defense Ministry, Sergei Chemezov, said the system will revolutionize missile defense. The S-500 is a Russian anti-ballistic missile system designed to replace the A-135 and to supplement the S-400. Chemezov said it is capable of destroying targets up to 600 kilometers away. He said it is also able to track and strike up to 10 ballistic targets, moving at a speed of up to 7 kilometers per second. Deputy Prime Minister Yuri Borisov says the Russian military will receive the anti-ballistic missile system soon. In Brussels, another EU summit has failed to reach a consensus over who will get the bloc's top jobs. Dutch socialist Frans Timmermans has emerged as the favorite for the Commission chief, a choice opposed by the Eastern Europe. More in this report.
The European Council has met in Brussels to decide on the candidates for the bloc's vacant leadership posts. The summit was delayed and paused when leaders were unable to reach an agreement. The deadlock continues over a successor to Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker. The centre-right European People's Party is pushing Germany's Manfred Weber for the role. German Chancellor Angela Merkel is unwilling to concede.
The parliament is fixed, in any case, with two large groups on the principle of the lead candidate, and at the same time, the greatest power, the European People's Party, has no majority in the European Parliament.
Das Prinzip des Spitzenkandidaten.
Ex-Dutch Foreign Minister Frans Timmermans is rumoured to be the compromise candidate. But the Eastern European states oppose the nomination of Timmermans, who currently is the Commission Vice President. Czech Prime Minister Andrej Babiš says the bloc's unification should top the agenda.
And also, Mr. Timmermans was not very much positive in the past about our region, so we need somebody to unify Europe, not to divide more.
French President Emmanuel Macron has advocated gender parity at the summit.
For the four jobs that are in the gift of the Council, there need to be 2 men and 2 women, and that is a clear commitment from me.
Once EU leaders nominate candidates, they must be approved by the European Parliament. It requires the consent of 21 of the 28 EU leaders, representing 65% of the bloc's population.
Protesters and riot police have clashed in Hong Kong after demonstrators tried to storm the Legislative Council building. Thousands of protesters faced off with the riot police on the anniversary of Hong Kong's 1997 return to Chinese rule. Demonstrators smashed windows and used a metal trolley to break into the building. The police responded with pepper spray. Hong Kong is bracing for further protests amid widespread anger over a controversial extradition bill. A small aircraft has crashed at a Texas airport, killing all 10 people on board. The twin-engine Beechcraft was taking off from the Addison airport when it crashed into a hangar. Witnesses say the plane lifted into the air before it veered to the left and rolled over. Headed for Florida, the aircraft burst into flames after the impact. No one was inside the hangar when the plane went down. Moving on to Venezuela, where the government has confirmed the death of an army officer in custody. Captain Rafael Acosta was arrested over his alleged involvement in a coup plot against President Nicolas Maduro. Opposition leader Juan Guaido has accused the government of torturing the officer in detention. Chief Prosecutor Tariq Saab says his office is investigating the death. This comes after United Nations Human Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet visited Venezuela to probe rights violations. Moving on to Pakistan, which says it's committed to a durable peace in Afghanistan and wants a positive outcome from the ongoing talks between the US and the Taliban. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said dialogue with Afghanistan is progressing in the right direction. This comes after Afghan President Ashraf Ghani's 2-day visit to Pakistan. After Pakistan's long battle against terrorism, over 90% of the tribal areas have been cleared of terrorists. Focus is now on development of the region. More from our correspondent Sumaira Khan in this report.
Pakistan's tribal belt of North and South Waziristan have been on the forefront of the struggle against terrorism. Agreements were inked to ensure peace in the region, but when army installations and civil society installations were targeted, it became necessary to weed out terrorism.
Prior to military action in the region, the situation was too dangerous for us to even leave our homes. We lost our elders, children, as well as the soldiers who were fighting to restore peace.
The roots of militancy were strengthened through ethnicity and intersect clashes. These were recorded as the worst in the past 30 years, specifically in Kurram district. Now, rehabilitation is underway in Waziristan after a costly battle between militants and the armed forces.
The influx of Afghan refugees disturbed the peace and fueled the conspiracies being hatched by anti-state elements in Pakistan. Things got even worse in Parachinar. Before the refugees came, there had never been sectarian clashes in this area.
Hundreds of schools, drinking water projects and several health facilities have been completed so far by Pakistan's military. The rehabilitation of educational facilities is a priority. The girls' education complex in Orakzai district used to be the hideout of a TTP leader, later killed in a drone strike by the US. It has been refurbished and proposes a bright future for women in the area.
My name is Nargis Fauzia and I'm serving as principal of this girls' educational complex in Orakzai district. Earlier we were in a dark era as peace was totally shattered. The Taliban had made the lives of the locals miserable. People who fled to other parts of the country received great help from the military in reconstructing this area, specifically schools, houses and hospitals.
Funds worth 1 billion rupees were allocated for South Waziristan. Rupees 1.5 billion was released for North Waziristan, rupees 422.5 million for Khyber and rupees 1.4 billion for Orakzai. Kurram has received rupees 1.1 billion and Mohammed rupees 490.5 million so far.
Once known as the hub of sectarian violence and terror activities from across the border, Kurram Agency is right now focusing on the uplift of its youth, and many mega projects are underway in this regard. Reporting for Indus News, Sumaira Khan, Kurram Agency, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Pakistan.
More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned with Indus News. Welcome back. Saudi Arabia has begun its Road to Makkah project at Islamabad airport today to make it easier for Pakistanis to make their annual pilgrimage. Under the project, Saudi immigration officers will clear Pakistani pilgrims for visas at the capital's airport. The Ministry of Religious Affairs of Pakistan says a Saudi delegation has started work in Islamabad. Religious Minister Nurul Haq Qadri says the project will soon be expanded to other cities as well. The government itself has already begun issuing e-visas for Hajj pilgrims under the new scheme. Flight operations for Hajj 2019 will begin on July the 4th. Nineteen people have been killed by encephalitis in India's Uttar Pradesh state. The deadly brain fever killed 152 children in Bihar state last month. 87 more diagnosed with the disease have been admitted to UP's hospitals. Government officials say the disease will hit its peak during the monsoon season from July to October. Those affected by deadly fever blame the BJP government of insufficient precautionary measures. Doctors say poverty and malnutrition in the state make children most vulnerable to the disease. A protester has been shot dead during banned anti-government marches in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Hundreds of demonstrators gathered in the eastern city of Goma after opposition leaders called for protests against the presidential election results. Police dispersed the protesters in the wake of the government ban on large gatherings. Police say force was used after protesters resisted. Polling has ended in Togo for first local elections in 32 years. The voting comes 2 months after the parliament approved 2 more 5-year terms for incumbent President Faure Gnassingbé. 8,000 security officials were deployed to ensure smooth voting in the tiny West African country. Togo elected its previous councillors for 5-year terms, but they remained in power for 14 years. Since then, the government has been selecting local representatives. Lows and the highs of the business world now. The world's top oil-producing countries are meeting in Vienna today to decide on extending cuts in production beyond June. Non-OPEC partners led by Russia will join the talks on July the 2nd. The meeting, originally scheduled for June, was delayed at Moscow's request. Saudi Arabia and Russia have already agreed to prolong oil supply cuts to further boost prices. Japan has imposed restrictions on exports of high-tech materials used in smartphone displays and chips to South Korea. Under the new rules, companies must obtain permission for each batch they wish to send to Seoul. Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry says the tighter exports control go into effect from July the 4th. Japan says it is considering removing South Korea from its list of preferential trade partners. South Korean tech giant Samsung and LG Electronics will be affected by the new restrictions. This comes after South Korean courts ordered Japanese firms to compensate victims for forced labor during World War II. Calling the curbs a violation of WTO rules, Seoul says it will respond firmly. Global markets surged after the US and China agreed to resume trade talks. US President Donald Trump has announced Washington will not impose additional tariffs on Chinese goods. The development boosted global markets, jittery from the US-China trade war. At its close, the Shanghai Composite Index jumped by over 2%. Japan's Nikkei 225 also traded more than 2% higher. In South Korea, the Kospi closed fractionally lower, while Australian stocks rose at the close. Pan-European stocks have added more than 1% at the start of their trading session. Oil prices rose by over $1 a barrel after some OPEC countries endorsed supply cuts after another 6 to 9 months. Brent crude futures surged almost 2% ahead of today's OPEC meeting. US crude futures also jumped by 2%. Congo and Egypt win their last group stage matches at the African Cup of Nations. Congo cruised to 4-0 victory over Zimbabwe, while Egypt beat Uganda by 2-0. Congo scored 4 goals against Zimbabwe. Both sides have been already eliminated from the tournament. Egypt continued their winning streak by beating Uganda by 2-0. The hosts, Egypt, go through to the last 16. Six suburbs in the Mexican city of Guadalajara have been carpeted in ice after a heavy hailstorm. The ice was up to 5 feet thick in places, half burying vehicles. The summer temperatures had hit 30 degrees centigrade in the days leading up to the storm. Civil protection machinery has been deployed to clear streets in the city of 5 million. Local officials have reported flooding, fallen trees, and damage to some 200 homes. Governor of Jalisco, Enrique Alfaro Ramirez, says there had not been any reported injuries or fatalities. The United Nations says urgent action is needed to avoid a climate change catastrophe. Addressing a 2-day meeting in Dubai, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says the world is facing a grave climate emergency. He says the situation will deteriorate if action is not taken. The renewed warning comes amid a record heat wave in Europe. And now the weather situation from around the globe. That's all for now. For further updates, stay tuned to Indus News.